Hello, Polytopians! Hi, I'm Zoy, you probably know that, and I'm here to answer your lore questions. Okay, well, not your lore questions, I mean, this is a video. But recently I asked people on our Discord if they wanted to know anything more about the game's lore. And this video specifically revolves around Imperius, Imo, Chinchi, and Yadak. And people gave us a whole bunch of questions, and I've selected a handful of them that I'd like to answer. So, without further ado, let's start talking about the IMO. Jed's Beds asks, was IMO always so peaceful, or did they not used to be pacifists? Well, the answer to that is I'd like to redefine what exactly a pacifist is. So the IMO are often seen as being peaceful and placid and meditative and so on and so forth. But I think that a better term is probably less aggressive. Okay. The IMO are still able to put up a fight. They just don't go looking for it. Now, they might be a lot less aggressive than many other tribes, for instance, but that doesn't mean that they're any stranger to punching people if necessary. So, the IMO are isolationists. They don't really like to mingle with others very much. But they've also been known to make preemptive attacks, just in case they feel threatened. So, pacifism implies like, oh, I don't like violence at all. But the IMO are very, let's say, precise in how they punch people. So, I would say that they're more peaceful than others, but not exactly non-violent. They just like to think a lot more before they punch people. So, and they've always been that way. So they tend to keep to themselves, and as long as you don't bother them, you'll probably be fine. Lawrence MK2 asks, what kind of government do the IMO organize themselves with? Well, if you compare them to groups like the Imperius or the Chinchi, you see something very, very different. They're all about empires and emperors and rigid hierarchies and whatever, but the IMO don't really have much of a strict government. I mean, they do, but their government is pretty much a theocracy that's a very loose confederation of cities. They do have a high priest who's at the top of things, but they're more of a religious leader than they are a political one. And most cities tend to have someone at the top who helps orchestrate things, but in reality, the cities themselves are generally, I'd say, a lot more egalitarian than a strict, hierarchy. So, think of the IMO as more of a loose confederation of cities that all have the same religion, and not, who all work together for each other's mutual benefit, and not a strict, here's the king, and it all works its way down from there. So, yeah, pretty different compared to most other tribes, but, it works out for them. Somehow they're able to mobilize armies and build monuments, while all having a pretty decentralized form of governance. So, yeah, hope that answers that question. So, now let's move on to the Imperious. Tuscan Beans asks, how did the Lirapachi fight as effectively as other tribe warriors with scrolls? Doesn't seem like it'd be a very effective weapon. Well, what is a club, right? The warriors use. They use these big giant clubs. And what is a club but just a big thing that you hit people with? It's a blunt weapon. You whack people, and it's big and heavy and has a lot of force behind it when you swing it, right? Not exactly a precise weapon, but gets the job done, right? And the scrolls that the Lirapachi use are very similar. They're big, they're heavy, they're durable, and you whack people with them. I mean, it might not be the most, straightforward of weapon, I mean, granted, but, think of it as doing a kind of sort of a dual duty here, right? You could hit people with it, and then when you're bored, you could unroll it and look at you know, tactics or scripts or something. I mean, it works as a way to, that they carry them around with them because they carry knowledge and things that the Lirapachi like to look at, and then they like to hit people with them. It's pretty straightforward. Just because it's not a standard weapon doesn't mean that it's not a weapon. Icy asks, I notice that the Imperious don't explicitly display forms of art such as paintings, music, or dance. What forms of dance or artistry is most prominent in this tribe other than their pride in sculpting and architecture? Well, there's a few bits to this answer here. The first and foremost is that, architecture and sculpting are very much forms of art, so those. But they do like music. If you notice, we have talked about the Imperious Philharmonic Orchestra, which the government totally doesn't use to brainwash its people. And so there is, in fact, a culture of music. It might not be the most prominent, and it might be very, very organized, but it is, in fact, music, so there's very much that. Now, one form of art which people don't think about is their interest in wine. Winemaking is very, very important to the Imperious. It's pretty much an art form in itself, as even though there's high standards, which various bottles have to meet, the various, winemakers themselves do have some freedom in how things taste a little bit, and how they do it and the colors that they can have. There's some ranges and some flexibility in creating the best wine that they can. So I would consider winemaking to be their big form of art outside of architecture and sculpting. And music. They might not be the biggest into painting and dance, but, I think that their forms of art are also bigger, like their interest in organizing. Their whole cities are laid out a certain way. It's kind of an art form in itself. So it might not be the most visible or the most, standard art, but there's a lot of ways which the Imperious like to express themselves, outside of what you might be thinking. DJ asks, why do Imperious like fruit so much? Well, it's simple. There's a lot of fruit around, So, when the people who would become the Imperious migrated out from the ancient Civil War into what is now known as Imperia, they noticed that there's a lot of fruit around. And that fruit was then utilized to make wine. And that wine helped kickstart their whole way of living. They built rules around it. And those rules turned into more rules, which eventually turned into the Imperious as we've come to know and love them. So, they like fruit because there's a lot of it. And they got good at utilizing it. So, it's a pretty straightforward and simple answer, granted, but, when life hands you fruit, you make fruit aid, right? So, and that's why they like fruit. It's pretty much what kickstarted their entire, empire. And they've come to know, and they've come to utilize it a lot since then. So, hope that answers that question. And now we're going to move onwards to the Chinchi. Dirtman asks, if the Chapeaux are highly trained assassins, why don't they start with cloaks and capital vision? So, there are two ways to answer this question, okay? The in-universe answer is that because, they have to know... Exploration is a very important part of finding where people are, right? Being able to climb mountains allows them to, to scope out targets ahead of time. You can't infiltrate somewhere you don't know about, or people you don't know about, so that height advantage of being able to climb mountains, as well as just the nature of the Chinchi liking mountains anyways, it makes pretty good sense. You climb, you know how to climb mountains. You climb mountains. Oh, look at that! It's the Yadak. We're gonna go stab him, right? So that's why they begin the game with climbing. Now, there's the other half of this answer. Okay, and if you don't like out-of-universe answers, then skip forward to the next section. But the other answer is because they're a tribe skin and they have to have the exact same mechanics as the Chinchi because they're a purely cosmetic tribe skin. So that's why they begin the game with climbing and not diplomacy. That's more of a Kazali thing. So yeah. So that's pretty much the best way to answer that. Hope that answers your question. Crotty asks, what exactly is it that makes the Chinchi so proficient in climbing? Do they have special climbing shoes? Well, in a very similar vein to the Imperius, and them liking fruit, the lands of the Chinchi are very mountainous. Okay, and the Chinchi themselves, despite being a very reserved kind of people, do like adventure. They're big into nature. They like camping and exploring, and mountains are there, so they climbed them. They're big into mountains because that's what's around them. And who hasn't looked at a mountain and thought, and asked themselves, "Can I climb that thing?" You know. And that's what the Chinchi are kind of all about. They have mountains, and the largest mountain on the entire planet is Mount Chinchi, which is what they named themselves after. So they just wanted to, and they climbed mountains, and they got really good at climbing. Now, you asked, do they have special climbing shoes? And the answer is yes, but they're not good at climbing because they have climbing shoes. It's not like they just opened up a closet one day and said, "Oh, hey, look at that climbing shoes. I'm going to go climb a mountain." Like, no. They climbed mountains first and then made climbing shoes to make it easier to climb mountains. So, cleats and whatever, right? And their culture has based themselves around the adventure of mountain climbing. Heck, even the emperor and their entourage climb Mount Chinchi every year to meet the Chidi Kai spirit, which allows them to make the Chidi Blossom Tree tea, right? And so this is ingrained in their culture, this ability to climb mountains, and that's what got them to make mountain climbing shoes, which only makes this easier. So yeah, that's they're proficient in climbing because they wanted to learn how to climb mountains. What else do you do, right? You got a bunch of them in your backyard, you might as well climb them, right? And after multitudes of failure, they've eventually gotten really good at climbing. So, yeah. Hope that answers your question. And now on to the Yadak. So, Stugamiur4 asks, how are the fezzes made? Well, they're made by Polytopians out of camelk felt. So, camelks are good for a lot of things, and in one of those things is felt made from the hide of camelks. That's the animal which happens to be around. They live amongst camelks a lot. They travel with them constantly, and a handful of them are bound to die, right? So they get skinned and turned into felt, which and then the felts are made into fezzes. So the tassels are just textiles, but yeah, no, the fezzes are made out of camelk felt. So yeah, a pretty straightforward answer, I know, but if you were hoping that there was some giant, underground fez, cartel or something, sorry. but no, they make them because they're simple, and they have the materials. There's plenty of camelks to skin, and felt making isn't the hardest. General Laser asks, do the Yadak have a sort of police force to keep people from stealing? And no, not really, no. They do have, obviously, any village is going to have people who kind of enforce things, right? And, petty stealing or whatever is probably going to be, looked down upon by nearby people. But you have to remember that the Yadak are generally bonded with with the Horn Trading Company. The vast majority of Yadak merchants operate under their banner. If someone's caught stealing, they lose their bond, or their support from the trading company, which is pretty much an economic death sentence. So, the Yadak tend to stay in line, or not steal, or attempt to use relatively fair business practices, not just because they're generally good people, but also because it'd pretty much be life-shattering if they ever, did something wrong. So everyone's kind of kept together because they know that their livelihoods depend on them staying together and playing by the rules. So, and besides, if the Horn Trading Company and your own business skills are able to keep you afloat, there's not really a point in... I'm not saying that the Yadak are perfect and that everything's, hunky-dory. No, I mean, there's probably good reason to steal on occasion. But it's the pressure of you'd lose your safety net if you did. And then you'd be shunned by everyone around you, and then you be kicked out of the Horn Trading Company, and so on and so forth, and you become, you go into poverty. It was probably a terrible idea, and that's really what keeps everyone together. So there really isn't as much of a need for enforcers. Although, if crime does happen to happen, I would imagine that the Horn Trading Company does send out its own people to make sure things are okay. And now, for our last question. Error asks, how do the Yadak monarchy and HTC, or Horn Trading Company, keep, or at least attempt to keep, the Urkaz syndicate in check? Based on the fact that outposts can show up when one falls, why doesn't the Urkaz just take control? Okay, this is a bit more of a complicated answer than how the fezzes are made. So, okay, well, the Urkaz are pretty good at laying low, okay? They're a crime syndicate, after all. Their entire business model relies on them staying out of sight. So, they've gotten pretty good at hiding, okay? But despite their abilities, the Urkaz are not... They don't have the resources that the Yadak monarchy or the HTC have. As I've mentioned previously in lore blurbs and so on and so forth, the HTC is the primary guild, trade guild, that the Yadak tend to use, and then the monarchy is the actual government, and the two of them are so powerful they kind of rival each other, okay? Kind of co-rule the Yadak. And both of them, while they might have their differences and skirmishes and, kind of want to take over the other one, both of them agree that the Urkaz are bad people, and they're willing to utilize their resources together to play whack-a-mole and stamp out the outposts of the Urkaz whenever they happen to be found out. But of course, the Urkaz are also good at being difficult to root out entirely. So they have connections, they have their own resources, and that's why there's kind of this equilibrium between the two big factions here, the HTC and Monarchy on one side and the Urkaz on the other, where one side's good at removing the outposts, the other side's good at making outposts. So the two of them kind of go around in a circle over and over and over again, like, oh, one pops up, we whack it down, one pops up, we whack it down, and so on and so forth. That makes the Urkaz difficult to get rid of, but it also makes it difficult for them to get a proper foothold and take over the Yadak. So, yeah, the two sides pretty much, so the HTC and the Monarchy utilize their resources and forces to stamp out the Urkaz, who are good at just popping back up again. And the cycle continues. And that's why they're pretty much known as the big three factions, all kind of vying for supremacy of the Yadak. Well, thank you everyone, that concludes the end of our Q&A session. We'll be doing plenty more of these as time goes on, so don't worry, there will be more. Sorry I couldn't answer everyone's questions, but yeah, you did ask me a lot of them. So yeah, expect another round of questions in the future concerning the next couple tribes. And we'll do more of these videos, and we hope to see you there. So thank you for watching. Have a good day, guys. Adios.